Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this. I am the CHALL, and today, welcome to Doncaster Rovers Press Talk. This is the revamp of our Press Talk series, where we're bringing in members of the press to coincide along with us. Some of these videos will be solo, some of these will be collaborated with a member of the press. We'll be analysing the pre-match conference before matches. So this is a brand new concept. Make sure you do like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell so you never miss a YouTube video. We're on the road to 3,000 subscribers and 500,000 views. I'm joined today by Tom Coates of the Yorkshire Post. Tom, how are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you very much. Ready and excited to get into a bit of a delve deep into what McCann has talked about going into this weekend's game.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to it.
100 million percent. So let's get straight on then. Let's talk about the key moments from the press conference. So starting off with Richard Wood, a couple of quotes from McCann on the mend, and seems like he's going to be good enough to play tomorrow, hopefully. So looks like Richard Wood, after that nasty cut against Wrexham on Tuesday, looks like he's all right. It wasn't as worse as we thought, as we feared, really. Richard Wood's been a key player to this kind of bit of form, hasn't he, Tom? He's been a real linchpin in the back line, and it would have been a bit of a nightmare well, not a nightmare scenario, because they've got Jay McGrath to come in. Obviously, Tom Anderson's still suspended, but I think if this was later down the line, I think Anderson would have come back. So it's not a nightmare, but it would have provided a very, cautious scenario if Richard Wood weren't available for tomorrow.
Yeah, it's an absolutely huge boost. I don't think it's any coincidence, really, that the uplift we've seen at Doncaster's coincided with Richard Wood sort of coming back into the side. I think it's a real shame that he's not played as much as fans would have liked him to this season because of obviously his injury issues. It's an absolutely huge signing. I don't think anyone with any knowledge of Richard Wood thought he was going to have anything but a great impact at Doncaster when he was signed by the club last summer. Such a great character to have in any dressing room at any level of football. And let's be honest, for all the talk of his character and what he can bring to a dressing room, he's still a hell of a centre-half as well. Got so much ability. And the impact he can have on the players around him is huge. So yeah, obviously spoke to Grant McCann this morning, confirmed that Wood is fine in himself. He's been through all the concussion protocol things that you have to do nowadays in football, which is obviously a great thing. But yeah, he's raring to go by all accounts. And yeah, I think you look at the performance against Wrexham in midweek and the partnership that he struck up with Joseph Olowu, and you don't want to break that up going into this weekend. I don't think any Doncaster fan will be keen for any changes in the middle of defence. Sort of touching on the Wrexham game, which I'm sure we'll mention later on. A lot of really good defences have struggled against Wrexham this season. The sort of plethora of attacking talent that they've got at their disposal. They can break down really good defences. That when they over the last sort of 2 years, when they've played against clubs at a higher level, whether it's cups or the high-profile friendlies you can do if you've got Hollywood owners, we've seen really good defenders struggle against Wrexham, and to keep a clean sheet, and not only keep a clean sheet, but put in a really good defensive performance. I think it's absolutely massive. And I think, Richard Wood's a real leader, as we've said, and he's only going to develop players around him. So, yeah, absolutely massive for Doncaster that Richard Wood's available this season. And I think when it gets to crunch time, or, squeaky bum time, as Fergie once called it, it's players like Richard Wood that can get you over the line, because, they're the ones that can set the standards. They're the ones that can, drag the professionalism up. They're the ones that can keep a cool head when it comes to it. And, Doncaster have got quite a blend within the squad. There's a lot of experience in there, but there's a lot of youth as well. There's players in there that perhaps haven't been in this position before. Certainly being sort of the hunters and trying to be sort of late surges into the playoff picture. So yeah, it can't really be underestimated how important Wood could be in this final running.
Yeah, 100 million percent. He's been such a vital player during the run of form, and like I say, it's been no secret with the run of form since he's been back in the team. Obviously, there's been some other struggles as well. We know that Waters had a bit of a virus. Obviously, he's been back training the last few days. We know Nixon's been getting on well in training, but obviously McCann mentioned his press conference that obviously Sterry's been in fine form, and it seems to be that he favours more attacking options on the bench, which is why Nixon maybe missing from a couple of games. But as McCann finally stated, Nixon could be out of the team 1 minute and then starting the next if anything happens to Jamie Sterry. So, people like Billy Waters, people like Tom Nixon, people like Jay McGrath, they'd be really important in terms of filling in when you need to for the rest of this season. But in terms of the options they've got available now at Doncaster Rovers, it's just a nice refresh to hear that we actually have a plethora of options to choose from after what seems like the last couple of seasons where there's been moments during the seasons in the past where we've had to field youth players and we've had to field kids and 18-year-olds to fill up the numbers. And there's been a few games in the past couple of seasons where we've had one less substitution than or option than other teams or opposition teams. So it's a real breath of fresh air. And I think massive credit, of course, goes to David Rennie, who, we knew coming into it with that new head of medical that he's got a plethora of experience with Leicester City, with Bristol City, Curzon Ashton, among others. And he deserves massive credit for getting that getting that injury bill down to a real minimum.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Grant McCann's made a real point of mentioning him and sort of paying tribute to the work that he's done. But when we speak to McCann now, you can see the relief and you can see how delighted he is to be working with a healthier squad, because sort of if you flip that and compare it to him earlier on in the season, you could see the frustration. No one could really blame him for how he was feeling, because he's come back to Doncaster. There was a lot of work done last summer to sort of revamp the squad and reshape it in McCann's image, and then all of a sudden he's not able to put his ideas across to a settled group, and that's difficult when you're coming into a club. I know he's been at Doncaster before, but he was still a new manager coming in, and you want to get your ideas across, but that's very difficult to do if you've not got a settled group. So yeah, it's I can sort of have to stop myself giving a little wry smile when you hear McCann talking about players coming back. But I think what it's done is it's made quite a resilient group. I think Doncaster, McCann himself and the squad, they've become so accustomed to injury problems now that they're able to deal with them really well. And you're talking about like McCann speaking this morning, talking about still potentially having maybe 8-9 players out, but even that compared to what it was like earlier in the season is miles better. And the squad itself, like I say, he now has options. And I know he mentioned Tom Nixon and the fact that even though he might not be getting on the bench, he could still be coming into the starting 11. And you sort of expect that at this stage of the season, certainly with the position that Doncaster Rovers are in. I think if in this position where they're not going to get relegated, but they've still a very outside chance of getting into the playoffs, I think the fans would be asking questions if you were stacking the bench with defenders and sort of leaving out attacking options. You want to be able to, if you need to chase a game, and that's arguably never as important during the season as it is now. When you're chasing, you're throwing everything at it. He wants that bench to be filled with attacking options. So yeah, it's definitely hard on players like Tom Nixon. But realistically, it's a very nice problem for Grant McCann to have. It's a very healthy dilemma, and one that you sort of can't begrudge him having at the moment. He's clearly enjoying having options at his disposal, and it's only going to be of benefit to him in the last couple of weeks.
100 million%. He's got a really nice kind of breath of fresh air, and like I say, a bit of relief off his shoulders now with the squad he has available. On contract extensions, because that was one of the major talking points, obviously, over the past couple of weeks, with Maxwell signing a new deal, Richard Wood signing a new 1-year deal, Ben Close signing a new 2-year deal, which seemed to have surprised a few supporters. But I think it'd be very poignant for me to say, and I think you probably agree with this, that away from the major injury that he received in the new year, Ben Close has been one of the best midfielders before that injury. So it's a vital deal in terms of getting him back involved, getting him back fit, ready for pre-season, and getting him back rolling to where he was pre-New Year. Obviously, more players to come. We know that McCann said in the conference today that 1, 2 more are close, possibly even 3. We know that some people have been sort of twisting words here with the words. Is there a case of? I think I saw some tweets about, is possibly 3 more, talking about, is he talking about the 3 loanees and things like that? But it should be very important for us to mention, Tom, that when he says possibly 3 more, he's talking about 1 to 3 new contracts.
Yeah, at the moment, that's certainly how it sounded, and we believe that is the case. And yeah, it's obviously massive that they're getting this business done at an early stage. It was something they actually did last summer, Doncaster, trying to get deals done early on in the window in terms of bringing in new players, and they're trying to do something similar now with getting contract renewals through the door. And obviously, the 4 that you mentioned there, Richard Wood, Ben Close, and Westbrook, and Maxwell, getting them down early is so important. And when I was in the presser this morning, my sort of mind was cast to the situation at Sheffield Wednesday now, and you've had Barry Bannon talking about the fact that there's a large group of players, their future's up in the air, and the actual impact that can have on them, when the future's up in the air. And compare that to Doncaster now, you're getting lads who know where they're going to be playing the football next season. That's an absolutely massive benefit. And we spoke to Zane Westbrook this morning as well, and he was clearly very relieved to know that he's a player that's done quite a lot of moving around, and the relief that you must get as a player, knowing that you don't, have to sort of uproot your life potentially into someone, where you're going to be playing your football next season. It's very nice, and they can just sort of focus on the football. People are very dismissive of that when it comes to footballers, because that they'll say, oh well, they earn this amount of money, they should be able to deal with the upheaval, and I agree to an extent, but they have families to think about, relocating kids sometimes. And I think from that mentality perspective, it's something that really needs to be considered. And from a club perspective, it seems to me that they've made a point of getting the experienced heads tied down really early. The likes of Wood and Close, and I mentioned Wood's attributes a little bit earlier on. They're the players that are going to set the tone in the dressing room, set the standards for, professionalism, and trying to, I think keeping that spine and making sure you're going into the summer transfer window with a really experienced spine is massive, because there's, the transfer window is tricky, and to go into a transfer window and sort of buy an entire new spine, and you bring in those types of players is difficult. If you can go into that summer transfer window with that spine already intact and secured on new contracts, it means you can be a little bit more almost experimental in the transfer window. You can maybe even take a few risks, because that you've got an experienced, settled, reliable spine that you will be able to rely on next season. So yeah, it's really good business from Doncaster, and if they're in a position where, when the window opens, they can sort of focus their attention on incomings rather than retentions. And obviously, there is every chance that a few might sort of bleed into the summer, and it might not be a case of getting everyone tied down early, but I think it's massively beneficial. And I think something else that Doncaster fans can take a lot of they can be really happy with is that Grant McCann talked about the way he works in terms of offering contracts. And I assume this is something he's done throughout his career. He was talking about once a contract offer is made, there's a deadline set on it. And I think that's massive, because I think as you go through the leagues, you only get more instances of clubs getting messed about. Obviously, it's not exactly a secret that you get cases where agents are sort of delaying the accepting of contract offers to sort of see what else is out there, putting the feelers out and trying to work out whether there's better options. And I think the way in which Doncaster are doing their business, it is really good, because not only does it mean that they don't get messed about, it means that the lads that they're getting signed to new contracts are actually committed to the cause. They're not just trying to angle for a move elsewhere. They're not dipping the toe into the market and looking at other clubs. It's a show of commitment, and I think the way in which they're doing it is ruthless, but to avoid being messed about, sometimes you've got to be. And I thought it was interesting this morning when McCann was talking about how if contract offers are made, then there are deadlines set on it, because it means that Doncaster you can swiftly move on as well if it's not going to happen. There's nothing worse, and fans will testify to this, of all clubs, it's happened to everyone at some point. There's nothing worse than protracted transfer sagas to sap the energy of fans. It's sort of fun and entertaining for a week, and then it gets very boring very quickly. You don't want a summer full of will they, won't they, are they going to sign, are they going to go, where are they going to go? You don't want any of that. All it does is disrupt. So, like I say, if Doncaster can avoid all that, rubbish, and go into this summer, very, very sort of clinical in the way they're doing things. Do you want to stay? Yeah, fantastic. No, right, okay, done, moved on, draw a line under it. So, I think it's a really good way they're going about doing it, and I think they'll reap the benefits coming into the summer window.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, there's some great players that have signed already. We know there's a few that, some players will, I think, being brutally honest, divide opinion amongst the fan base, but some definitely want to be signed according to the fan base. And I think that obviously one of the big names early on is Luke Molineux at this stage. When you look at what McCann said today with the fact that one or two are close, maybe possibly three, I mean, is there any names that spring to mind in particular that you think they're probably more likely to get a deal than others, without giving anything away? Because obviously we want to keep our cards close to our chest. Is there any you think, in your personal opinion, that could be closer than others? Because when I look at the people that are still out of contract this summer, and when you think, right, one, two, maybe even three names spring to mind already. Well, 3 or 4 names spring to mind already: Molineux, Rowe, Biggins, and Faulkner.
Yeah, it's really difficult to be drawn on names at this stage. I think the ones that you've mentioned, sort of based logic, directs you towards the players that have played regularly when they've been fit, and the players that you've mentioned are players that McCann has relied upon and clearly rates, even if they've not played all the time. That they're players that he's made it clear he's a fan of. So it's really difficult to be drawn on names. Again, you would guess, if you were going to sort of cast aspersions, that you'd be guessing that it's the players who play regularly who would be looking to tie down. But you never know. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes, and what goes on in training. So, yeah, it's really difficult to get drawn on names at this stage. I think for Doncaster fans, I guess it's just a case of of taking it as it comes. I mean, at this stage, what we're in now, 5th of April, I think if you'd asked Doncaster fans, right, you'll have these 4 players tied down to new contracts for next season, I think they'd snap your hand off. And I think anything, certainly, we're only in April. There's still plenty of time for deals to be done. In terms of individuals, yeah, it's anyone's guess at this point. I'd like to have more of a clue than I do, but I don't. So yeah, it's anyone's guess really. But you would imagine, again, logic would direct you towards the players that are featured more prominently, and the ones that have sort of not been regularly featured, even when fit. You would imagine that those would be sort of lower down the list of priorities. But like I say, it's anyone's guess really.
Yeah, 100,000,000%. And that's something that McCann really didn't want to get drawn into. He's someone who keeps his cards close to his chest. He keeps it very much in-house, which is always, a fantastic operation because it keeps opposition teams guessing about next season as to what kind of squad your opposition is going to field next season. And same with transfers as well. And, obviously pre-season is going to be a massive, massive thing with the whole Spain thing and, potential friendlies here in England. It's going to be, very, very much a closed shop until it gets announced by the club in terms of transfers, in terms of pre-season, in terms of what kind of squad we're looking at for next season. You'd say preferably the individuals on the pitch right now, the ones that are going to be here next season. Obviously, there's 3 main individuals that, might not be here next season, depending on what happens with their situations. Obviously, Hakeeb, Adelakun, Thimothée, Lo-Tutala, and Matthew Craig. I mean, obviously, the fans all want those 3 players to be signed up, or at least 2 of them to be signed up, more than the third one, because it might be less likely with Matthew Craig, depending on his situation with Spurs. I mean, obviously, Yorkshire Post put something out this week about Matthew Craig, and, I thought that was a very interesting read because it was like, okay, is there a potential opportunity here to maybe explore something with Tottenham? And it's, someone like Matthew Craig, who isn't the oldest player, but he's a young emerging leader. He's shown what he can do. I spoke about Matthew Craig when we signed him, and I said that he's got legs, he's got energy, he's a emerging young leader. He's the kind of player McCann wants. Give this signing time. First couple of games he struggled, but after that, he's kind of flourished since then, and we've been kind of proven right on that regard. If we're being honest here, if there's a deal to be done and Spurs come to Doncaster and say, right, we've got 2 years left in his contract, we don't see a pathway to the first team yet, we can explore the possibility of first refusal for another loan deal. Or they come to Doncaster and say, we don't see a pathway to the first team. If you've got X amount of money, let's say 100, 150 grand, maybe 200 grand maximum. If they offer that and Doncaster have got the money without it crippling the club or denting the rest of the transfer budget, and they say, right, we can do this deal, should Doncaster Rovers be exploring this deal permanently or on loan again next season? Is this a deal that Doncaster Rovers should be doing?
I think if it's doable, sort of financially, I think it's an absolute no-brainer. My inclination would be, I would guess it's more likely to be a loan. Just because but who knows? But yeah, we spoke to Matty Craig. It was before, it was last week actually. And as all players do, they're all very media trained nowadays. And they kept his cards very close to his chest, but didn't deny it. Spoke really glowingly about his time at Doncaster. I think that was one thing that shone through. Clearly, really enjoyed it. It's worth mentioning that I can't remember exactly. He's 20 or 21. He's not a teenager, I don't think anymore. Yeah. And it's worth mentioning. This is his first loan, and in the modern game, that's almost quite unusual nowadays. It's quite common now for players to be going out on loan at 17, 18, 19. So for him to have been kept sort of within the Tottenham ranks until he sort of got to this age now it's almost quite unusual. So yeah, he spoke really glowingly about his time, clearly really enjoyed it. He mentioned a lot about Grant McCann being a midfielder himself and learning from him. So yeah, he didn't sort of throw cold water on the possibility of returning. He was very open to it. He didn't say it was definite. He didn't say it would, certainly be happening, because he's never going to say that. But he certainly didn't say it was completely off the table. But the frustrating thing is, as much as, I imagine when a lot of Doncaster fans read that story about him, being open to the possibility of it, will have been very excited. But the reality is, again, not to dampen any excitement, but a lot of things can change between sort of late March and the summer transfer window. The chances are, he's been in constant dialogue with Tottenham, that they've been keeping a close eye on him. But the chances are that he won't really have any idea what's happening next season yet. That's the brutal truth of it. The chances are that he won't know where he's going to be playing his football, because the plan, for example, could be Tottenham could, by all accounts, be at this stage be more than happy for him to go to Doncaster, but something could change at Tottenham. A club might come in, offer, a sort of a loan plan for him there that might entice Spurs. You never know. It's a complete guessing game. So yeah, obviously it's very encouraging that Matthew Craig has clearly enjoyed himself. He said as much, said he'd potentially be open to coming back, but the chances are that in the summer, there's every chance Doncaster might not be his only option. And more to the point, it might even not really come into consideration how much he's loved it at Doncaster. If Tottenham want him to go somewhere and he wants a future at Tottenham, he'll probably have to listen to him. So, it's completely up in the air at this point. But for me, if a deal can be done and it's affordable, like you say, it's not going to sort of put a huge dent in the finances. I think it's a no-brainer because he's coming and I think he's brought that bit of Premier League quality. He's clearly someone who Tottenham think a lot of. He came on the final day of the Premier League season last season against Leeds United. So he wouldn't have been used in that game if Tottenham didn't see anything in him. So yeah, he's been a really fantastic addition to the Doncaster side, and I think if something can be done, I don't see why they'd shy away from it.
Yeah, 100%. And to be fair, when he came on against Leeds, I thought he did all right when he came on.
I think he was only on for about 2 minutes, was he not?
Yeah, I thought he did right in the 2 minutes.
Yeah, a good 2 minutes, fair enough.
But no, as you said, Craig's brought that kind of Premier League-esque kind of senior intelligence for a young player at that. And, he's very much a project player as well. Even at 21, he's very much a project player. So if he was to come back, then he'd be a real kind of vision he's a visionary player in terms of what Doncaster want to build around long term, as we've talked about with the spine of the team. Obviously, same story with Lo-Tutala at Hull as well. I'm guessing, obviously, Lo-Tutala won't want to rule anything out, but again, he'll be another individual that keeps his cards close to his chest. Same with Adelakun. Again, we don't know what the long-term plan is for Lincoln. Obviously, Lincoln didn't look like they had a plan for him at that stage, but maybe they're looking at his performances now thinking, we might be looking at bringing him back here. So again, for those two players especially, it's going to be another very open conversation in the summer.
Yeah, definitely. I think at this stage, if you said to Doncaster now, you're going to definitely have them for next season. I think again they'd bite your hand off. Adelakun's another one we've spoken to in recent weeks, and very sort of less open than Craig. He spoke really glowingly about his time at Doncaster, but didn't really make any comment on a potential stay for next season. And that's not to say that he doesn't want to. It's just a case of, like you say, keeping his cards close to his chest. But he's been an absolute revelation since he's come in. I think it's a case with Adelakun of he's been shown a bit of love. I think if you look at his career trajectory, he's drifted between being the main man and then being a bit part player back to being the main man, and he's sort of been drifting in and out. And I think at this stage of his career and with the age he's at now, he wants to be appreciated as a player. He wants to take on a prominent role in his side, and I think McCann's given him a lot of trust. Brought him into the side. He hadn't played loads of football before he came in, but he's had that trust from McCann pretty much from the get-go, even when he wasn't fully fit at the very start. Clearly a believer in his ability. And sometimes with players like that, you've just got to give them the freedom to express themselves. He's such a good attacking outlet, certainly at League Two level. So yeah, he's been absolutely fantastic for Doncaster. And I talked about the fact that Richard Wood's return from injury coincided with the upturn, but I think Adelakun's another one where you can sort of draw a line between him arriving at the club and the upturn in form. He's been a massive factor in that. And then obviously Lo-Tutala as well. I would argue it's almost quite harsh on Louis Jones. I didn't think he sort of did too badly really. There was clearly a need felt from Doncaster to bring a goalkeeper in January. Obviously you've got Ian Lauder injured as well, so they obviously wanted the depth, but. I was almost quite surprised when he was thrown in straight away as the number one. Obviously, he's not like Jones he's not the most experienced figure, but yeah, he's someone who's done really well. And I'm quite intrigued by the goalkeeping situation at Doncaster this summer actually, because let's assume Lo-Tutala goes back to Hull. You've got sort of Lawler and Jones, which are the goalkeepers he started this season with. And it's a case of, do you sort of roll the dice again? Do you go into this season and trust that them two are the goalkeepers who can battle it out and have healthy competition and both be reliable enough in their own right? Or do you see the need to dip into the low market potentially and go and get someone else in like Lo-Tutala or, potentially even try to get him back? So, that's a position that does sort of intrigue me. I'll be interested to see what they do with that over the summer.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to be a very interesting one. I think the goalkeeper situation is one of the biggest mysteries of the summer for us because, like I said, Lawler and Jones both out of contract next season in next summer, and it's that choice. Do you roll the dice? Do you trust your goalkeepers. And, you know, something I've always said about Lewis Jones, I've always said that Lewis Jones is more of a traditional keeper rather than a sweeper keeper. He's been very much on his line, stays on his line, tries to command his area from his line, doesn't really come out as much. And his defense in the first half of the season let him down more than he's let himself down with some of the goals he may have done better with. I think that his defense made more mistakes than him, but it seemed like it kind of felt like Lewis Jones has been more of a scapegoat in some of them situations. I mean, we saw it, you know, with the Crew game, I think it was when we just lost. You know, Jones was getting heckled, he was getting abuse, he was getting all sorts. And then the next game after that, he put in an absolute worldie of a performance. And there were some people that didn't even praise him. They still said he weren't good enough. So is it kind of, I know it's different levels, but is there kind of vibes of a De Gea agenda here with Lewis Jones? Is there a case of he's becoming a scapegoat, and then when he eventually leaves and does better at another club, it's like, you know, it's one of those things where fans that backed him turn around to the fans that didn't and be like, are you happy now? Do you feel like it's one of them situations brewing at the moment, or do you feel like there's something deeper?
No, I mean, I will certainly don't think there's anything deeper. And I have to say a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm probably not as plugged into sort of the discourse among Doncaster fans as you are. I, to be honest, wasn't even particularly aware he'd been made much of a scapegoat, because obviously in terms of my role, I sort of, you know, watch Doncaster, report on Doncaster. But in terms of being in and amongst the conversations of fans when it comes to players like that, I'm probably a lot less plugged in than you are. So yeah, I mean, you've surprised me, to be fair, talking about the amount of criticism he's had. I think it's again, I've not watched anywhere near as much of Doncaster as I have a lot of the fans who will be having opinions on him. But, you know, I don't think he's disgraced himself this season, to be honest. But you sometimes get that, playing. You get it at all levels, at all clubs. I've never sort of spoken to a club's fan base who aren't divided on at least one player within the squad. And, you know, sometimes that player plays for the club for years. You know, off the top of my head, an example I think of in the Championship is Leeds with Liam Cooper. You know, club captain, been there years, and yet some fans absolutely love him and some fans really dislike him and have done from day one. You sometimes can't explain it. And, you know, you get it in the Premier League, you get it at Champions League clubs, you get it all the way down to non-league clubs. It will always be the case in football because, you know, it's one of the reasons people love it so much because, you know, two people can watch 90 minutes of football and come away and sit in the pub and have completely different views on what they've just watched. And it'll always be like that until the end of time. So, yeah, it does surprise me, to be fair, that, you know, you've said I wasn't particularly aware of it myself, the amount of stick that Jones had got, but I can understand it, and I can, you know, I can completely believe that is the case because that's what fans are like, and they're entitled. You know, they pay the money to go and if they want to think a player's rubbish or think a player's fantastic, that's, you know, it's completely their prerogative. So, yeah, but like I said, it'd be interesting to see what happens in the goalkeeping department this summer.
Yeah, 100 million%. It's going to be very much a mystery that gets solved by the end of the window in the summer. Obviously, we spoke about the summer in general. Obviously, the summer transfer window is going to be a very interesting one this year with the contract negotiations, with the ones that are still yet to be signed, who leaves in the summer. And then who do you bring in? It seems like Grant McCann's going for very much a sense of continuity with a sprinkle of magic going into the summer transfer window. Just those kind of few, like 5-6 signings on top of what you've already signed down to a new deal, and maybe try and get some of the ones that are out of deal, let's say next season, onto improved contracts maybe before the summer. Your likes of Owen Bailey's, your Jack Seniors, people that for me should be getting tied down to longer deals before it gets to even January, in my opinion, next season. So when you look at the summer transfer window coming up, I mean, people know if they've watched the recruitment series, my kind of criteria for transfers. Obviously, you don't know this yet, but I've kind of gone with like 5 or 6 positions in terms of what I think we need in the window. So I've gone with a sweeper keeper, either on loan or permanent. So someone who's comfortable on the board, joins in the back three with the build-ups, either a ball-playing defender or a stopper. So it could be a left-sided or a left-footed young ball-playing defender. So you could get a teenager from the National League. You could get a sort of younger player from that kind of level, or loan someone in who can add a bit of pace and a bit of balance to that back line. You could go with another stopper, so like a Wood or an Anderson style player with a bit of experience behind him. We know there's quite a few out there, including ones that have worked with McCann before. You've got a young attacking fullback on loan or permanently to kind of back up Jamie Sterrick. We know Tom Nixon's going to go back to Hull. We know I don't think we're going to get a permanent deal from him, in my personal opinion. I feel like Charlie Seaman's going to leave anyway out of contracts. He's not been featuring at all this season. So if you want my best guess, I could see him joining Wildstone permanently. because obviously they're going to start rebuilding under Stuart Maynard in the National League. Obviously, we know that wingers is a big prerogative. We need a left-sided winger like an Adelakun style who can isolate his man, great in one-on-ones, bit of magic with his feet. A ball-playing midfielder like a Craig-type playmaker role with a defensive mind, but also someone who can play, very much on the front foot. And then you've got an attacking midfielder who can press in the opposition's half in different positions, drift wide sometimes and cover space, and then a pressing forward on loan or a permanent young pressing forward who can kind of drop back into that number 10 role if need be, if you need someone that's a bit more adaptable. So you've got about 5-6 positions there that's on my list in terms of what I think we need in the summer. When you look at the current squad, when you look at who's going back on from their loan spells, what would you say Doncaster Rovers need in order to move forward next season in terms of getting to where they need to be? And also, if there's any names that come off the top of your head that you think would be great for Rovers, who would you say they need to look at signing and why?
I think it's, again, really difficult to sort of come up with names just because at this stage of the season, you don't know who's going to be available. Like, so much can change over the next month. I think we'll get a better idea of the players that are going to be available to Doncaster once the return lists come out at the end of the season. I think that's when the wheels really start turning. You can actually start to draw realistic targets. In terms of positions, I don't think you're far off at all with the positions that you've laid out there. I think a lot of Doncaster fans will probably agree with you. I think the important thing, talking about summer recruitment, is that I don't actually think it needs a summer overhaul. And I think outsiders looking in will probably look and think that's a strange thing to say, considering how much time Doncaster have spent, near the bottom of the table and spent in the bottom half. The people will look at that and think that last summer was an abject failure of recruitment, and it wasn't. Obviously, there's been not all the signings have been absolutely wonderful, but there was an overhaul last summer. There was a reset, and you could use that as well as the fact that there's been an injury crisis as one of the reasons it's been difficult for McCann and Doncaster this season, because it was a huge transitional period where you're moving from one era into another, and you're ushering in a new group of players coming in from different places, and it does take time for that to settle. So I think the key thing for me this summer, sort of almost deviating away from positions and names, etc., is just making sure that it's just adding in very specific areas. I don't think it needs a scattergun approach of bringing in huge groups of bodies. I don't think it's required at all. I think it's a case of cherry picking the places where there can be real areas for improvement. And like I say, I think that the list of positions you've reeled off there, I don't think they could do much worse than recruiting in those areas, to be honest. I asked Grant McCann this morning whether sort of looking at out of contract players is something that they're doing at this stage of the season, and his answer was, well, yeah, that it's something that they cover all bases. They're constantly looking, even now, sort of putting contingencies in place. I'd be very surprised if there isn't, hidden away in some folder somewhere a contingency plan for if they make it into the playoffs and go up, because that's how football clubs have to operate nowadays. They've constantly got to be second guessing what the next stage is going to be and thinking about the next step. So I forgot to speak then. I imagine Doncaster will be looking to the free agent market this summer, or at least the market of players that are set to become free agents, just because obviously they're not financial powerhouses. There was a huge amount of recruitment last summer, and then a fair few in January as well. I think the loan market will be something they'll use heavily, because that's it's what absolutely every League 1 and 2 club does now, because it's so it's such a shrewd way of getting talent on board without having to break the bank. And, the loan additions this season have been a little bit hit and miss, but I would argue they've probably been more hit than miss. So, like I say, I couldn't be drawn on any names at this point. And, I imagine fans will probably be disappointed that a journalist is sat here not naming potential names. But, the truth is that it's anyone's guess at this point. I'm sure that they'll have names already that they're sort of starting to look at. But, that's part of the excitement coming at the stage of the season, as well as, the final placings. It's, who's going to be playing for us next season. And that's something they can look forward to.
Yeah, 100%. And, it's going to be very interesting this summer, because obviously there was very much a lot of project players that were brought in this summer and over previous summers as well. Your James Maxwell's, your Owen Bailey's, they're not too old. They're not too, they're quite far off their prime as well. They're very much long-term vision players. You've got your experience in there as well. It's going to be very interesting to see what the kind of direction they go in mainly this summer. Obviously, we're going to have a bit of a mix of range in terms of experience and, youth and potential. But it's interesting to see where the main direction is going to go this summer, because, obviously it's just list a few names out of contract at the moment without naming official names that are going to be out of contract by this time in a couple of months. You know, you could go one direction where you look at your project players that are out of deals, or your 12 months remaining that are from Premier League 2, National League, you know, people that are going to improve the side long term. But then again, you look at players like Matty Virtue, for example, at Blackpool, who's not been getting a lot of game time. He's out of contract this summer. He's got a lot of experience to his name. But the financials behind a deal like Matty Virtue, compared to someone else lower down or younger, I'd assume would be very much different. So if you were to look at the main direction of the summer window, when you look at the squad currently going into next season and think, right, experience or youth, what direction do you think they'd look to go in more? Because I was about to say this, it kind of gives me vibes this summer coming up of Darren Ferguson built his foundations, Grant McCann sprinkled the magic over them. Grant McCann built the foundations this season. Now it looks like this summer could be a case of maybe sprinkling the magic over them, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. I think adding it, for example, let's work on the assumption that Doncaster don't get promoted this season. They don't make the late surge into the playoffs and make it into League One. I think it's a case of looking at the real difference makers. You know, I think you look at Doncaster's squad now and take all the players who are going to be sort of going back to their loan clubs, to their parent clubs, and take all the ones who will definitely be here next season out of it. And I think, you talked about sprinkling magic, and I think it's difference makers, you know, whether it's League Two or the Premier League. And when a team goes up, you always look and think, right, you know, they were a good team and they were a cohesive unit and all of this, but there's always a difference maker. There's always a star man or two or three that were the real ones that stood out and sort of separated you from the pack. And I think, you know, they often don't come cheap. They're very hard to find. But I think Doncaster will definitely have their eye on getting a player like in next season. But I also don't think they'll be neglecting youth at all. I think one of the benefits of them tying down, as we discussed earlier, some of the more experienced heads, getting them committed for next season, is that you can sort of now be right, okay, we've got an experienced spine, and you can almost afford to look towards the younger end of the market then. So I think that's something that will definitely come into play. But yeah, if I had to guess in terms of the types of players, it would be, I think they'll really have their eye on someone. I mean, like, for example, if they signed Hakeeb Adelakun, that I think is one of those difference makers you'd be talking about, because he's made the difference in the second half of this season, and I think it'd be a real statement if they went out and got him. Obviously, there might be other clubs looking at him as well, so it might prove difficult. But that type of player, if you went and got an Adelakun in on a permanent deal, you know, the type of signing that, you know, fans of other clubs in League Two look at and go, that's not looking forward to playing against him. That sort of signing, you know, could really get the ball rolling. But then, like I say, a couple of young players in, and Grant McCann has shown that he's very astute at getting young players on board and working with them and identifying the areas where they're raw and getting them up to League Two standards. So, I think it'll be a bit of a blend as always, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, another thing that I think McCann will probably look for, if he can, because obviously it's very hard in certain positions in the table to look for players like this, and that's proven winners. You know, and also people that have not received a lot of game time at proven winners. People like, say off the top of my head, Miles Hippolyte at Stockport, not received a lot of game time this season due to his injury situation. However, on his day, one of the best in that position in the league. Jamie Walker, you know, yes, he hasn't won things with Bradford, but again, he's someone who's in that position, is one of the best in the league. Someone like a Hippolyte, who's looks like it could be part of a winning squad here with Stockport, depending if they win the title or not. Again, do you think proven winners could be on McCann's agenda as well?
I think potentially, yeah. The only thing I'd say on them, you talked about sort of injury issues. I think that will be, I should probably mention before, that's something that McCann will have in his mind, I would guess, in the recruitment team. They will bet, I think they'll be, you know, however many years McCann's in post at Doncaster, I think he'll always, to an extent, be haunted by this season and a feeling of what could have been if they hadn't had the amount of injuries. So obviously, I know that, you know, the medical department's got a new head now, so it's slightly different. But I think they will be very keen to look at players who've got relatively clean bills of health when it comes to injury. I think it will be a little bit of a red flag if they're dipping into the transfer market and players have got, you know, histories of injuries and are constantly picking up knocks and niggles, because, you know, the last thing Doncaster want is a repeat of this season, because like I say, I know we'll get onto it, talking about sort of how the general season's been and the upturn, but it does feel like it's been a case of what could have been, and Doncaster will want that again. So if they go and bring, you know, a load of injury-prone players on board this summer, I think a lot of fans will look and say, well, we've not learned our lessons. So I do think that'll come into the thinking. I think I would be very surprised if the players that Doncaster look at this summer have got. I'd be very surprised if they've got patchy injury records, because I think that's something they'll be keen to stay clear of.
Yeah, 100%. Right then, let's get into obviously a bit about Tuesday night. Obviously, going into this weekend against Morecambe. Wrexham, I mean, overall, great win by Rovers. I was sitting next to, obviously, if people watch the videos, I was with Tom from St. Louis in America, who came over for the game. We both said the same thing. It seems like Wrexham have got a very aggressive press, but we kind of counter-pressed them very, very well, and we kind of made them lackluster in the final third overall. And it seemed like as the second half went on, the press came less from Wrexham. And obviously the goal was the main difference. I think if we had our shooting boots on a bit more, I think it could have been 2 or 3. But then saying that, Wrexham could have had a couple of goals depending on how chances went as well. But it was very much a comfortable win overall. It kind of felt more comfortable than it maybe could have been.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and I mean, this is a good thing. I don't think Doncaster showed Wrexham any respect. And I think that's what you've sometimes got to do. And, I see it too often at sort of all levels of the EFL, where a club sort of who have been in the bottom half of the table come up against a team at the top. And they'll sit off. And sometimes you've got to, I appreciate that tactically. If you're coming up against sort of superior attacking talent and you go all gung-ho, then you're going to get caught out. But I do think that there's a time to, have a little bit of confidence in yourself and show a bit of belief and, go for the jugular yourself. And Doncaster, based on the last 6 games, Donny are top of the table. So there's absolutely no reason for them to fear anyone at the moment. There's no reason for them to camp in their own half and be fearful of what the other team might do to them, because they've shown over the last sort of month or two that they can compete with any team in League Two. So I think Doncaster fans would have been very disappointed if, even against a team like Wrexham on Tuesday, it had been a case of sitting off and letting Wrexham do what they want. Doncaster were very aggressive in the way that they dealt with Wrexham, and I think, certainly, we mentioned earlier about the fact that Doncaster are the hunters now, not the hunted. They're the ones chasing down the playoff pack. They're the one, outside contenders. No real pressure on them to get into the top 6, but it's not impossible. 6 points to go, 7 points to make up. And, why not give it a go? Why not go and attack Wrexham? Why not counter their press? I don't think there's much benefit now for Doncaster from being cautious. And, it's going to make for a really exciting end to the season. We hope from a neutral's perspective, it'd be really nice to see Doncaster make a proper go of it like they have been. And, you've seen over the last few weeks, taking the shackles off attacking players, letting them, go and really express themselves, regardless of who you're playing against. It's fantastic to see. And I think, you've seen the fear. There's absolutely no fear factor at Doncaster at the moment. And that's why it wasn't a particular surprise to see a performance like they put in against Wrexham.
Absolutely. And then, this gives me, and I said this to someone in the past couple of weeks, this gives me similar vibes to Lincoln in League One, a side that's not under a lot of pressure to get into the playoffs, but a side who are very much looking like they could sneak in there. Again, Lincoln and Doncaster are very much similar to each other. They play great football, and they're both just about to, Lincoln's obviously in there pretty much, or about to get in there. Doncaster are sneaking towards it, especially with the games in hand on other teams. And obviously, if we don't get into the playoffs, it's still been an amazing run for the end of the season. If we do, then McCann's more of a legend than he already is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at where Doncaster were earlier on in the season and where they are now, and it's absolutely fantastic. And it does, I mentioned earlier that it feels like a case of what could have been, and it does feel like that because, some of Doncaster's games earlier in the season, and at the time, you understand Grant McCann's point of view. He was talking about the injuries pretty candidly, but he will have been cautious, to not see headlines, see fans saying, oh, he's using it as an excuse. And you see that a lot in the Premier League. You hear managers talking about the fact they've got 3 injuries and, well, that's why we didn't win. And you sort of do react in that way. You're very dismissive of it. But you can't be dismissive of how many players McCann had to deal with out earlier on in the season. It was absolutely huge. And he certainly wasn't using it as an excuse. Some of the performances weren't fantastic, and no one can get away from that. But like I said earlier, to convey your ideas to a group that's constantly changing and chopping and changing, and like I said, I think there's a couple of key factors that when you sort of line them up with the timeline of this season, you look at the point at which Doncaster started massively improving. There are key factors that were sort of the catalysts for the improvement, if you like.
Yeah.
One of them, was getting players back from injury, the main one. second, Hakeeb Adelakun coming in, 3, Richard Wood coming back in. I think they were the 3 main ones that have given him a real springboard to go on from. So, yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. And, in terms of managerial achievement, to take Doncaster from where they were to where they are now is, it's no short of remarkable.
Absolutely. And finally, of course, looking ahead to Morecambe this weekend, I mean, you've got a side here who, when they're consistently on it, they're a very physical pressing side. They can get the ball up as quick as they can. They're very physical. The problem with Morecambe, and this is from a Morecambe fan that told me a bit in the last few days, they need to be more consistent doing it. Does that give Rovers a lot more hope going into this game, especially beating the likes of Wrexham, which is a statement win against a side that's chasing third? I mean, by the way, I think Wrexham for me, just kind of touching on Wrexham a little bit, Wrexham for me, I don't think this has disrupted them. I think they're still one of the favourites for third place in automatics. It's just going to be a case of, can they get over this blip? But from a Morecambe team that's had a couple of good results in the last few games, Morecambe, who, again, chasing down the playoffs, and the majority of Rovers' last games are teams that are chasing down that 7th place. So they could prove to be a very nice run in terms of where these teams are. So, again, a statement victory against someone like Morecambe this weekend, who is chasing down 7th place and could sneak in there. Again, is this an opportunity for Rovers to say, here we go, 6, 7 cup finals left to go this season. Just go for it. We've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, definitely. It's absolutely huge. And I think, the Doncaster-Morecambe game, it's going to be one of those games that makes, I hope it is anyway, it's going to be one of the games that makes this stage of the season so exciting. You've got 2 teams, still something to play for. There's a playoff spot potentially there for one of them, but no massive pressure. Nothing really to lose. So, it's got all the hallmarks. And I know it's going to be 0-0 now because of what I'm going to say. But I think it's got, all the signs of being an absolutely thrilling game at this stage of the season. We're seeing a lot of them now, sort of in all 3 tiers of the EFL. You're seeing teams that, that they're not in particular danger of going down, but there's still a sort of glimmer of hope of them going up. And, it makes for excitement. And the funny thing is, and this isn't to downplay or dismiss Morecambe as a threat whatsoever, but I spoke earlier about Doncaster having real no fear of anyone at this stage of the season because on form they're the best team in the league. McCann at this point might as well be like, I don't care who we're playing. You know what I mean? We can just, it's the way it is. We can go and express ourselves and, go on the attack and show no fear because realistically, Doncaster on form, no one's better at the moment. So there is absolutely no reason for them to be cautious, to show trepidation. Doncaster have shown that certainly the way they're going forward, they can cause anyone problems. So there's absolutely no reason for them to be particularly conservative in their approach. So yeah, it's going to be, Doncaster fans have got a really exciting running potentially, and a win at the weekend could really set the tone because you'd be beating a side that are in a stronger position than you going into the game. So it could be a real statement, and if they get a win.
Absolutely. Tom, what a debut episode here on Press Talk. I want to try and make this a weekly occurrence because it's almost been a real lesson today. You've pretty much educated some of the Rovers fans on kind of some ins and some outs, and
I'm not sure about that.
But no, it's been a nice experience because we get to kind of delve into the press side of it and kind of really delve into conversations about different topics. And, it's proven to be a real lesson today. So, no, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure you do like, comment, subscribe. Comment down below if you want more of this. I am the CHALL. Ta-ra for now. That is full time.